sorry, so how we can introduce it into our language programs. Anyway, to say a few comments first of all about critical thinking. First of all, it's one of the 21st century skills. And these are the skills that have been recognized that are important for students and for those going into employment in the age of the internet. So we're talking about the last 20, 25 years. And they can be classified in this way. And there we see critical thinking as one of the learning skills. Another thing we can say about critical thinking is it's a type of thinking. So we've got a number of different types of thinking: everyday thinking, creative thinking, critical thinking, scientific thinking, and so on. Perhaps we can actually condense scientific and abstract concrete into critical thinking. Everyday thinking is the kind of thinking that we do on a daily basis when random thoughts drift into our minds. So things, for example, like where did I leave my keys? What am I going to have for dinner? I wonder what the weather's like. So these are random and they're involuntary. They just drift in. Critical thinking is very much non-random. It's very conscious. We decide to think about a particular topic. So it is voluntary. It's also reflective, meaning that we think about something deeply and for a long period of time. And it's also reasonable, meaning that we use reason to decide what to do or what to believe. Another point about it, it is something that is rarely taught explicitly, even though it's an integral part of academic life. So everything that a student does at university or college will involve critical thinking, either writing an essay, reading a textbook, looking at data, taking part in a discussion, and so on. But I think in many countries, the assumption has been that it's something that we pick up along the way and it doesn't need to be taught explicitly. I think the mood is shifting away from that view. Another thing we can say about critical thinking, it encourages the examination of our cognitive biases. Now, a lot of these biases have been identified, but we should be aware of some of the more important ones, or make our students aware of them. And I've picked out a few examples here. So, for example, confirmatory bias. This is when we look for data which confirms our point of view. So we don't take a broad range of data, we just look at data, cherry picking, it might be called, taking data that confirms our point of view. Conformity bias, well, we all like to conform to fit in with our colleagues and our friends, fellow students. It is often called groupthink. So it's a kind of lazy thinking where we adopt the thinking of the people around us rather than looking at issues ourselves, and so on. Hindsight bias, availability bias, etc. It encourages a focus on facts, data, and evidence. So this is central to critical thinking. And at the same time, it encourages skepticism and doubt. Skepticism is a good thing. It's not a negative thing. It's not the same as being negative or cynical about the world. It is questioning, for example, as in this cartoon, questioning something that we are given and we're told that everything is fine, and a critical thinker would want to look at it carefully and ask questions about it. Which brings me to the next point. this leads to asking questions. And here we really are at the crux of critical thinking, the ability to ask questions, not just factual questions, but probing questions, awkward questions, difficult questions, inconvenient questions even. So to get to the truth of a situation. So that's a kind of quick overview of critical thinking and why I feel it's important and it should be included in our programs. Ideally, we would have a separate critical thinking course, for example, where I've been working in a foundation program for universities. Ideally, it would be an element of the foundation program alongside study skills, academic English or whatever, IT skills and so on. But in practical terms, very often the teacher doesn't have the luxury of being able to organize the syllabus, and so we're left with the classroom situation. So this is where I've come in with some practical situations, some easy practical ways of introducing critical thinking into an existing program. And sometimes these are just 5, 10, 15, 20-minute activities that can be put alongside the existing program. The 5 of these: introduce metacognition, thinking about thinking, add flexible critical thinking tasks and activities. I'll give you some examples of these that are available in the real world we can pick up on. Whole class debates, very useful for a number of reasons, but mainly because we can use them to get students to strengthen the way that they build an argument, they develop a case. Puzzles, riddles, and quizzes. And then finally, something a little bit different, I'm going to look at how we can add critical thinking value to what we're already doing with our language exercises, with our grammar exercises, our vocabulary exercises, how we can just up the stakes a little bit, adding what I call critical thinking value to this. Right, okay, so metacognition, getting students to think about their thinking. I like to use this image to show students this, that they're actually, in a way, they're stepping outside their bodies. They're being objective. They're looking at themselves as they study, or as they make a decision, or as they learn a new skill, or whatever. And they're looking at themselves and thinking about what thinking processes am I going through. So we should encourage them to think about their thinking and say, by watching yourself, you will become a better student, by watching what you do, what habits you have, and thinking about how you can improve those habits. So what topics can we include for this activity, for getting students to think about their thinking? Self-reflection topics, we could call them. So we could look at how we make a decision, for example, or how we find a solution to a particular problem. Taking examples from our everyday lives. How we complete a task. If we're given a task to perform, how do we complete it? How do we prepare for an exam? How do we learn a new skill, like skiing or dancing or whatever? And also, how do we overcome cognitive biases, such as the ones I mentioned earlier? Okay, so here's a task. It's not really a worksheet, it's just a guide for discussion. So I think students in 2s and 3s can look at this and share their experiences. So think a bit about a big decision you had to make recently, a new job, moving home, ending a friendship or a relationship, etc. Big decision, and we all have them from time to time. So what issue did you need to decide about? What steps did you go through before you made your decision? Was it a good decision? How could you improve your decision-making process? So again, it's just a guideline for a kind of structured discussion on this particular topic of decision-making. So we can do something similar with learning a skill. Think about a new skill you have acquired recently. Painting, photography, making a video, driving a car, skiing, dressmaking, whatever. Okay, so again, what skill did you learn? What approach did you use to learn the new skill? Did you watch other people? Did you go to manuals? Did you go to YouTube to find a video? What did you do? What approach did you use? Or did you just go through trial and error and practice on your own? Were you successful? How could you have improved the way you learned the skill? So again, it's meant for discussion, a kind of structured discussion. And we can do this again and again with different topics, as I outlined a minute ago. Okay, let's go on to the second one, which is critical thinking tasks and activities. And here we're particularly looking at ways to get students to ask questions, to be skeptical, to ask difficult, probing questions. And luckily we have several, with the internet, we've got a lot of rich resources that we can use. One I like very much is scam emails. So I like the idea of using scam emails as a way of getting students to question and to be skeptical, partly because I like the idea that people who send out these were actually using their material for something useful, something they didn't expect. So we're kind of turning the tables on them, I think, and making use of which would normally be very annoying. So should I delete or open the following email? And you might want to have a minute just to look at this email, if you can see it. Well, when I got this, I chose to delete it. I don't know if anyone would like to open it, but I chose to delete it. And just think for a moment why. I assume you all would delete it, but let's think for a moment why you've chosen to delete it. And here's a worksheet that we can use with any scam email, or we can make one that is tailored to a particular email, but this will do, it's a generic one. So what does the sender want you to do? Why are you suspicious? List 3 reasons. Okay. You might want to look back at the email. Okay, well, I was suspicious for a number of reasons. First of all, it's generic. It's not to me personally. Secondly, there are a lot of language mistakes in this. And I thought, well, if a big company like PayPal sends out an email, they're not going to have language mistakes and punctuation mistakes. And so what they want me to do is to click on one of these links, and I decided not to. So they want me to click on a link, unusual language and grammatical errors, no name or customer reference. So it was a generic greeting. Also, we could mention it's a very basic design. There's no company logo. Right, and here's another one. This looks a little bit more authentic until you start to read it. Supposed to be from Microsoft. And I wonder why you would decide to delete this. Well, I hope you agree with me. First of all, one of the things we have to look out with scam emails is that there's this sense of urgency. If we don't do something very, very soon, then we will lose our account or we will lose money or something. So there's always this sense, there's often this sense of urgency. If you read the text here, you will have noticed a few grammatical mistakes, unusual language. And at the top here, we can see that it comes from a Hotmail account. It doesn't sound as though it's authentic, an authentic address from Microsoft. Well, I mean, this is an unlimited resource. There's so many scam emails, and you can get such a lot of, well, you can get a lot of fun out of it, but a lot of useful work in the area of critical thinking and building this concept of asking questions. Is this really a genuine email? Right, another thing that we can draw from the environment, particularly on the internet or in magazines or newspapers, are advertisements. Now, why are advertisements such a rich source for critical thinking? Well, let's have a look. I think we can characterize advertisements as being very subjective. They're full of emotion and exaggeration. They often make misleading claims and they don't supply evidence to support their claims. Sometimes they're not actually truthful at all. So this is really the opposite of what we want our students to do in the academic world. We want them to be objective. We don't want them to use emotion or exaggeration. We want them to use facts and data. The claims must be based on solid evidence. And of course, they have to be truthful. So again, a very rich source, easily available. Here are some examples that I've drawn from the internet and magazines, but you can build up your own stock of them. These old cigarette advertisements are quite interesting because they often have doctors or physicians featuring in the advertisement to give the cigarettes an aura of respectability and being healthy. But we know this is not a doctor, it's a cartoon, it's a drawing. So a lot of questions are begged from advertisements like this. And then there's one here, an anti-coronavirus mattress, which is a bit suspicious, I think. And sales advertisements, we know that often we are told about sales, but up to 50%, but the clue is in up to, and we're often disappointed when we go into the sale and we find that most items are either not included or they're 20% or 30%. So a rich source. Here's let's focus on this one. It's for a face cream, less wrinkles in only minutes. So it's supposed to be fewer wrinkles, of course. And what about the worksheet here? What claim is the advertiser making? Think of 3 critical questions you could ask the advertisers. So I think this is a very useful exercise, encouraging students to ask questions. Well, the claim is that the cream will improve the appearance of your skin in minutes. So the questions, you may think of your own questions here. Do these photos really show the same person with the smooth skin and the crinkly skin? How long, how many days or weeks or months do you need to apply the cream? When it says minutes, what does that mean? Minutes every day for how long? What tests did you carry out? Where is the evidence? So we're getting students to think about the advertisement critically and come up with questions like this. And this worksheet, I believe, you can use for any advertisement that you find, because all advertisements make a claim of some sort or another. Or you can do something which is more specific for a particular advertisement. Okay, another rich area is misleading data. Again, easily available to get examples of misleading data. And there's a lot of, in the era of the pandemic, there's quite a lot of data around, which is often misleading. Let me show you an example. So this chart, it's quite an old chart, by the way, at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. It shows cases by country. So if you look at this, you think, well, there's the United States at the top of the list. It's doing really badly. And there, for example, near the bottom is Austria, and that seems to be doing quite well. But of course, the big fallacy here is that they're not comparing like with like. United States has a much bigger population than most of these other countries. Well, most of the countries. And so a much better guide is this one, where the cases are per million inhabitants. So now we're getting closer to comparing like with like. And what do we find here? Well, the United States still not doing very well, but it's not at the top of the list. And Austria actually is slightly worse than the United States in terms of the number of cases per million inhabitants. So this is something that students need to be aware of and to look out for in data. Not comparing like with like. We can't compare apples with pears, but we can compare apples with other apples, in other words. Okay, so that's an example, not comparing like with like. Wrong graphical representation we often find. So maybe a graph is being used instead of a bar chart, or a bar chart is being used instead of a pie chart, so on. Cherry picking, we've mentioned already, taking the data that suits your particular case, but it's not looking at the whole range of data. Lacking in context or perspective, we could call that availability bias. So just taking a slight fraction of the data that's perhaps easily available. The y-axis not starting at 0, that's very important. The y-axis, if it doesn't start at 0, it can give false impressions of the data. I'll give you an example in a minute. And it might actually be inaccurate as well. So let's have a look at this one. Now, if we look at sales of vinyl LPs in the UK, these are the old LPs, which are making a bit of a comeback in Britain. We see the second half of the year from the 7th month, which I think is July, through to December, we see an upward trend. So if the sales manager was presenting this data, he would have a nice picture to present. But of course, if we look at the whole year, it might be a different story. And we see that the first half of the year, sales fell quite dramatically. and have only just recently started to recover. So we've got to see a broader context as well. And you can take any part of a graph and take that little bit of the graph in isolation or a bar chart and present it in the way that you want. So we have to be aware that there's also a broader picture that we have to look at. One final one, this is to do with sales of newspapers in Britain, the Times and the Telegraph. And the Times is sort of boasting that its newspaper has got much bigger sales than the Telegraph, and you can see there's quite a big gap. I don't know if you can read it. 485,000 against 446,000. But if you visually, it looks like a big gap, but then you notice that the y-axis doesn't start at 0. So what at first glance seems a big gap, in fact, is rather small. You know, it's something like a 10% lead or something like that. So that's another way that data can be manipulated. And again, something that is important for students to be aware of. And there's a worksheet. What does the graph, table, and chart show? What possible problems are there with this data? And suggest a better way of showing the data. So again, that can be used with any item of data that you have selected for the students. Right, let's move on to the third way that we can introduce critical thinking. Class debates have been long used in English language classrooms for developing oral fluency and teaching the skill of standing up in front of other people and debating. But with critical thinking, I think we need to focus on the way that you need to build a strong argument when you're developing your case. Let me give you an example. So we could give the students a topic like this: prepare an argument either for or against the following. Children should not have mobile phones. Well, of course, we need to specify what we mean by children. Is it 12 and below, or 10 and below, or 14 and below, whatever? That's another issue. And ideally, we would divide the class into groups. So one group would give the argument for, and another would give the argument against. But if we give them a worksheet like this, then we're actually helping them to structure and to build their argument. So it's not just a case of oral fluency or developing confidence. It's actually showing them how to build an argument. And that's a skill that is useful in other areas, like in writing a research paper or whatever. So building an argument, so they would start off with their opinion, reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, backed by evidence. They need to have some evidence, not just anecdotal evidence. Some examples, and possibly sources. If they've given time to prepare their talk, their debate, they can find sources to support their evidence. And so 2 or 3 or 4 reasons why they think that in this case it's a good idea or a bad idea for children to have mobile phones. And then the opposing view, recognizing that you have thought about the issue widely and you are anticipating the views of the opposition, but again, you have an answer to that. And then the conclusions, restating the view. So something like that, I think, helps students prepare the debate. And then it comes into classroom management. Do you just have 2 groups, or do you involve the whole class? Or just have part of the class involved and part as the audience, and giving feedback and so on. That's a classroom management issue. Right, let's move on to the fourth one, which was puzzles and riddles. The good news about puzzles and riddles and problem solving is that it actually, the more that we do of these things, it's been shown, the easier they become, the better we get at solving problems like this. And so the more of these puzzles, there are also fun things to do. You can fit them into a class in a few minutes. But the more of these we can do, the better the effect. Excuse me. So these can be word puzzles or simple mathematical puzzles, or little riddles, or maybe more complex puzzles, which are really describing a situation, and the students have, by reading this description of the situation very carefully, they can find the answer to a particular question. So you've got a range of possibilities here of puzzles and quizzes and so on, which will practice this skill. Okay, finally we'll go on to the last part, adding critical thinking value to language exercises. Well, here we don't really need to do anything. We don't need to find extra time in our program, in our busy program possibly. All we need to do is to check what we are teaching already when it comes to, for example, vocabulary, grammar, syntax, reading, and writing. So we need to look at all of these. Let's look first of all at vocabulary. So some of the traditional ways of teaching vocabulary would be using pictures, using objects, matching words and definitions, also matching words with pictures and words with objects as well. Getting students to fill in gaps in a text with certain items of vocabulary, selecting the right one, looking at synonyms, looking at antonyms, and also translation. So I think all of these are fine as they are. But if we want to challenge our students a little bit more, we want to increase the level of critical thinking or add critical thinking value, as I say, there are other things that we can do. For example, we can group words into categories. And the whole idea of taking a number of items and deciding which items have something in common, making them different from the other items, that is in itself a critical thinking skill. Seeing that they're not just all the same, some are different from the others. So we can group the words into categories. So for example, food items, we can group into meat, dairy, vegetables, fruit, and so on. And then we can develop that into a classification chart. Again, using food items, we can make putting in subgroups and so on until we have a classification. Another thing we can do is grading items. So instead of just learning a lot of adjectives describing size, we can make sure that we put these into an order, starting from tiny up to enormous. So this is a way of organizing this information. Again, with bodies of water, oceans and seas, for example, again, we can teach these, putting them into a grade, or getting students to put them into a scale, if you like. So starting with a puddle and working up to an ocean. I probably missed out a few others as well, but you see the idea. Okay, so that's what we've done with vocabulary to make sure that we're maintaining this level of critical thinking into what we're already doing. Sorry, a couple more examples here. Writing sentences using the word that we're trying to teach to demonstrate the meaning, and then discussing word choice. So what's the difference between reduce and alleviate, for example, or buy and purchase? Right, let's move on to grammar and syntax. So traditionally, going back a long time, we've started with rules and gone on from rules to examples. So we give the students the rules and then lots of examples and then lots of practice with that. And there might be multiple choice, gap fill, matching of clauses, so the subordinate clause, and pick an appropriate main clause. Sentence transformation as well, from active to passive. What we can do to raise to challenge the students more, something that is a lot more common now, is starting with examples and getting students to work out the rules, so inductive instruction. And then things like sentence completion, rather than matching two halves of a sentence, getting students to write the second half of the sentence. So a small change, but it challenges the students a little bit more. And then jumbled text, I think, are very, very, very useful, whether it's at the sentence level or the paragraph level or the essay level. I think you learn a lot by trying to reassemble a piece of text. And then looking at word formation as well, and the grammatical function of that form of the word. Let's go on to reading. So with a reading text, you would have a lot of maybe factual, low order questions. So questions beginning with why, when, who. Other activities with a reading text, like scanning through the text to find a particular piece of information, filling in gaps in the text, or matching parts of a text with another, and then transferring data or information from a text into a diagram or into a chart of some form. Okay, all useful activities, but again, we have to make sure that we're using higher order questions. Questions like, why did the author explain the reasons, and so on. So challenging the thinking of the students, and then getting them to analyze the reading text, looking at the structure of the text, looking at the author's view, commenting on the style of the text and who the audience might be, and so on. Okay, I think it's very good that we explain to students what we're doing, that we're actually stretching them more by getting them to look at the structure of a text and by asking these more complex and more difficult questions. Okay, so the last point I want to deal with is writing. So thinking here about writing, not in the sense of writing stories or poems or diaries or anything like that, but really academic writing. And I'd like to give you this quotation from Jordan Peterson. The best way to teach people critical thinking is to teach them to write. So I thought about this for a while, and I thought, well, why did he say this? He didn't back it up with any other information or data. It was just a comment. But starting to think about it, it is, if we assume he means academic writing, I think that is clearly the case. It is a very good way to teach critical thinking. Let's think about all the skills that are involved in critical thinking. In academic writing. So first of all, there's reflection, brainstorming, gathering ideas. So, and then there is research. So selecting information and data and deciding what is important and what is not important. What are good sources of information and what are not good sources of information. Organizing and planning. Presenting arguments, as we were discussing when we looked at debating. So supporting an argument with evidence, reasons, and examples. Using and acknowledging sources, again, saying which are useful sources or reliable sources and which are not. The careful use of language, style, defining terms. As I mentioned earlier, you know, if we're talking about children and mobile phones, we have to, before we do anything, we have to define what we mean by children. What age group are we starting about? So defining the terms that we are using, whether it's using a term such as poverty or stereotype or success or whatever, we need to have a clear definition that we have in our mind and we explain to the reader. So again, an important sub-skill of critical thinking. And then rewriting and editing. And finally, listening to feedback, being able to be objective about what you have written and take on board other people's comments without getting upset or angry, and acting on that. So I can understand why Jordan Peterson said that it is a good way, if not the best way, of teaching critical thinking. And as we teach writing, I think we should make students aware of that they're also improving their thinking skills at the same time. Right, so those are the elements that I've gone through. I think I've more or less said everything I want to say. Perhaps there'll be a short time for any questions or discussion. So those are the things that I mentioned. I'd like to just refer to a couple of books I've written on this topic, Framework, Academic Writing and Critical Thinking. And in these books, I've used a syllabus, a component of writing, and also alongside it, a critical thinking component. So thank you very much for your attention. If you'd like more information or you want to get in touch, there's the website and the email as well. So I'll hand back to you, Yusuf, and if you have any comments, if there are any questions or points of discussion, I'm happy to deal with that.
Thank you, Richard. So looking forward to receiving comments. Nice presentation, I liked it. So if there are any colleagues who would like to ask questions or make comments, they're welcome to.
Yeah, Richard, thank you so much for presenting. I think definitely in the language classroom or English language, I think this could be really good, like icebreaker in the beginning. You know, instead of the the usual just curriculum, or I think it'd be really used for kind of to start the class in the beginning, the riddles, or so. I think it was really great.
Thank you. Yes, yes. I think as long as we make students aware of what we're doing, we say, we're having fun, but we're also teaching you something serious here. We're teaching you how to think, basically.
Yes.
Right, any other comments then? That either means everybody totally agrees with what I said, or I'm just trying to check the chat box here. Okay, just a few general comments. Thank you, Captain. Okay, well, if there are no comments, I think I'll finish there then. Thank you very much, Yusuf, for organizing this. And as I say, if people want to get in touch, they're very welcome to. I'm not sure if there's a recording of there is a recording, so I'm not quite sure how that works now, whether it goes on to, it's available to other people afterwards. But as I say, if anybody has any comments, then I'm happy to reply to emails on this as well. Okay, thank you, Yusuf.
Thank you. It was a nice class to end the seminars on.
All right.
Yours is the last conference, so.
Oh, right. Okay. So I hope it's been a very good conference. Anyway, I look forward to joining it again in the future. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.